Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Welcome, everyone.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
How you doing?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
What's up?
And in this episode, we'll be covering the new BNR announcements, and possibly the most important day in CEDH history. That's
and there was much rejoicing.
Bold claim.
Since partners, I'd say.
But yeah, Flash is banned. We did it. We did it, Reddit. We did it.
So it turns out my mic was actually on this whole time, and our voices got heard.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. So let's just jump right into housekeeping. So housekeeping, we've got a new patron. So big shout out to Jonk. Again, thank you to our patrons. You guys are helping us, fund the editing for this show and hosting fees and all that jazz, and putting that money to good use. But yeah, let's move on into the exciting stuff, shall we? So new developments. Biggest one, first on the list, Flash is banned. And we actually have a comment here from listener Redshift. He wants us to get a minute of... I'll just read what he says. Redshift says, can we get a minute's silence on the next stream out of respect? You can squeeze it into the 45 minutes you were going to spend talking about the two-headed giant shit.
So, no, because I don't respect Flash. But on the note of two-headed giant shit... seeing as we know that's why everyone listens to the podcast, we have decided that since obviously our in-person local two-headed giant tournaments aren't happening right now, we are going to organize an online one, which is currently going to be tentatively Sunday, May the 10th, which is a week after this episode releases. So if you're interested in trying out this mythical format, definitely come check that out, and we'll have some more information for you when this really episode goes live.
Interesting format, definitely like a hybrid between multiplayer EDH and 1v1 dual commander.
Yeah, definitely
and like Legacy and Canlander to an extent as well.
Yeah,
very, very interesting stuff. Ban Karn, please. Okay. Let's get into the main topic. So we're going to start by having Morgan's going to read the actual announcement, because there's some interesting content. We're not going to read the full announcement. There was also some stuff about banning Lutri and how the companion... I almost said companion commanders. No, just how the companion cards work.
Yeah, they're basically commanders.
Dude,
they're all legendary creatures.
I've watched some Magic streams, and continuously people who don't play Commander, Magic Pros or whatever, people who've won Pro Tours, they're just making the constant Freudian slip of calling the companion their commander, and it's just so funny.
Is it even a slip though? Honestly, it's just they're basically just commanders.
Yeah.
I get why they couldn't call them commanders in the text box, but basically, right?
Also, it is kind of interesting that you can't. I don't know why you would, but it is somewhat interesting that you can't wish your commander into your hand. Or your companion. God damn it. You can't wish your companion into your hand, even though it is outside the game. But, whatever. So, Flash. Speaking of exceptional decisions, we are banning Flash. The card, not the mechanic. Enough CDH players who we trust have convinced us that it is the only change they need for the environment they seek to cultivate. Though they represent a small fraction of the Commander player base, we are willing to make this effort for them. It should not be taken as a signal that we are considering any kind of change to how we intend to manage the format. This is an extraordinary step and one we are unlikely to repeat. We use the ban list to guide players in how to approach the format, and hope Flash's role on the list will be to signal cheating things into play quickly in non-interactive ways isn't interesting. Don't do that. We believe Commander is still best as a social-focused format and will not be making any changes to accommodate tournament play. Taking responsibility for your and your opponent's fun, including setting expectations with your group, is a fundamental part of the Commander philosophy. Organizers who want to move towards more untrusted games should consider adding additional rules or guidance to create the Commander experience they want to offer.
Well said, I think.
Yeah. So I think first of all, let's get some acknowledgements going. So obviously this is great for CDH as a format. This is a result of a long campaign by the CDH community and community leaders who've been in constant contact with CAG members and RC members. This is something that pretty much every CDH player has wanted and has vocalized. We've been very unanimous on this front, and so I just want to let's everyone give themselves a big pat on the back. We did it, hooray! Right,
and also I do want to acknowledge the voices, particularly some of the more influential ones who really didn't have a dog in the fight, but realized that we were miserable, and realized that what was needed to fix it wasn't a huge ask, and was something that they felt, even as people more responsible or more involved with the casual side of Commander, was something that they felt that they could give. So casual content creators who publicly supported a flash ban, members of the CAG, obviously,
big ups to Shivam. Yeah.
But just, there were lots of people who, gave us a hand here when they definitely didn't have to. And I think it's important to recognize that.
Also, I do want to, we shouting out CAG members and community members. Also, just shout out to Sheldon. For the longest time, I know he's been kind of he's basically a martyr for the for the RC, and he's kind of just like standing in front of all the arrows. If you've seen the meme of, I think it's like Link standing like shielding Zelda from a bunch of arrows or something like that, he kind of does that for the RC. So even if he agrees or whatever, he'll kind of like take all the shit on behalf of all the RC members. So I know, or at least my understanding was that Sheldon was actually kind of on the side of banning Flash for a while, and it was actually some of the other RC members who had to be convinced more. But nevertheless, he was constantly taking a ton of flack from people online. So thanks for making this happen and putting up with all that garbage and still not letting that affect your ultimate decision.
Yeah, seriously.
Speaking of the RC and this change, there's been a decent amount of discussion about the tone of the post. And if you're like really upset by that post, get over yourself. There's like, this is not the language that people are objecting to is not directed at CEDH players. They are clearly trying to communicate to the casual player base, who is the vast majority of their audience, that this doesn't signal a change with how they're approaching format governance. And they are also trying to signal to competitive players that this isn't them opening the gates for us pushing for the next thing to be banned. And people acting like this is somehow the most like condescending or patronizing thing, you're reading into something that isn't there.
And it's making us look bad, making CDH players look bad.
And also, like, they didn't have to do this. Even if, it came across as, they were sort of trying to show off how magnanimous they were being. They still are being magnanimous, and they definitely didn't have to do this. So, like, just stop.
Just smile and be happy that we got what we wanted at the end of the day. I've said to some people online and talked to these guys before the show started. An analogy I've been using is that it's like you sued someone and you're just upset that they didn't smile as they hand you the check and you like won in court. It's like just be happy that you won and got what you wanted and move on. But yeah, so along these lines, let's talk about something that he mentioned, not setting the precedent and not opening the floodgates to future bans. And I know this is a big concern that I've seen among casual players, that this is setting a dangerous precedent, slippery slope, yada yada yada. And one of the things that was really emphasized with this ban campaign, by the CDH community and the CDH community leaders was that Flash really is unique And it's not just that it's the best combo in the format, and that, once you ban this, there's going to be a next best combo, like it is in other, constructed formats. There's always going to be the next best thing. CDH players are always going to, find the next broken thing, and then they're going to complain about that. Well, I have no doubt that people are going to complain about the next, you're going to be complaining about Consult and Timna, and, we're going to be doing that on the show as well, later episodes. So, feel free to quote this back to us, but there is something fundamentally different about Flash. And we were campaigning on the fact that Flash was a unique case that is, very, very unlikely to be repeated. So we don't really need any more bans beyond Flash. Like, the meta can adapt and handle the rest of this after Flash. So please don't make liars out of, the community leaders who helped facilitate this ban, and, the CDH community who were saying, this is it. Just stop asking. Don't bother, the CAG or the RC, demanding, ban Thassa's Oracle, ban Console, ban Tainted Pact, ban Timna, ban Thrasios, ban Mana Crypt. Like, we did it. We got what we wanted. Let's stay true to our word. And, if you see people, bothering, Sheldon or Shivam or whoever on Twitter about this kind of stuff, or CDH players, or they're, on the subreddit or whatever, try and make the case that the meta can adapt to Consult decks. Even though they're very strong, it's a very strong combo, we can adapt to that in a way that we can't adapt to Flash. And this podcast is going to be a great resource to kind of help explain how we think the meta is going to shape up and, actually adapt to the upcoming meta.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two key ways in which Consult or Oracle or Tainted Pact, or whichever card you pick from the Consult shell, just isn't Flash. The first is that it's not nearly as much better than everything else, is as Flash was. It's a very awkward statement to word, but the gap between Flash and everything else is much larger than the gap between Consult and everything else will be now. But also, Consult does fundamentally the same thing every other deck is doing to win the game. It's just like a little bit more efficient. It doesn't add like a whole new dimension along which it's strong, and it doesn't like warp the game in the same way. You have to respect a 3-mana sorcery speed 2-card win condition out of your opponent. Like, that's strong. No one's denying that. But that's not like, a lot of the win conditions before that were like 4-mana 2-card sorcery speed win condition, or, like even an ad nauseum plus a dark ritual is like a 3-mana win condition, right? Like, it's not this somehow like magically different than it's not different than every other win condition or whatever other deck is trying to do in the same way that Flash was.
Mm-hmm.
Which means we should be able to handle it.
Yes.
And we'll give you the top 10 tips and tricks that the RC doesn't want you to know to help handle Flash and then just stay tuned. Except
the RC definitely does want you to know them so that you don't yell at them to ban cards.
Yeah, we're not going to get all the YouTube clicks and views if we don't clickbait it with some hot titles.
Work
there.
the algorithm.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Gotta get those views.
I think we hit the 10-minute mark.
Before we recorded this, we reached out to the Into the North Discord to ask our listeners, to ask our listeners to give their statements and sentiments on the ban and how they're reacting. I kind of thought it'd be interesting to get a snapshot of this moment in the history of our format, because this is likely to we're never likely to see something this momentous ever again. Hopefully nothing this momentous ever happens again, because I feel like that's this going to be a very bad thing. It can only spell...
definitely we're open to things that are equal in magnitude, but maybe on a different scale.
I don't want to envision this like what is what is going to cause the scenario where something is equal in magnitude to this. But that's another digression. But yeah, so let's get into what our listeners had to say. So Keegan says, "Rip Flash, where half the game time was spent resolving mulligans."
ZWells3 says, "Where Blood Moon and Rule of Law effects were falling out of favor, they are no longer just cards that help the Flash Hulk decks at the table win more easily."
BendingGuy says, "King Thrasios is dead. Long live King Thrasios."
Z-Wells also says, "I don't think it's advisable to start discussing anything related to potential new bannings. I only say this because Shivam and Sheldon have made it clear in the past that their main concern in banning Flash would be the slippery slope of the CDH community asking for them to ban the next best thing."
Thunderfarts says, "Regardless of what might come next as one of the more prominent strategies in the format, the Flash ban has gotten me to do something I haven't done in a long time. In-depth brewing. I'm finding myself looking at the commanders I'd otherwise cast aside because they couldn't compete with Flash. I'm excited to brew for the first time in a long time."
Tarak Plz says, "Hull decks have been with me through my entire CDH journey. I started with janky Abzan Hulkweaver Hate Bear decks that developed from an arms race and a casuals playgroup to a little bit of shuffle, a quick transition to Sacred, and eventually Sushi. Considering the time, effort, and money I put into Flash Hulk, this ban would be devastating. This should be devastating for me. However, I'm very happy it happened. I think many others feel like me, and IMO. In my opinion, this shows that banning Flash was the right thing to do. I'm excited to see where this journey will lead and to see what new and exciting non-Flash based Hulk decks will appear in the new, undoubtedly more healthy era of CDH."
Squirrel Mob says, "The reaction over the tone of the ban list announcement is overblown, especially considering it's saying the same message they've given all along."
And last but not least, Jenks says, "I'm very excited to see what the next few months look like for our format. Consultation gets stronger, sure, but Rule of Law and Stacks effects will help mitigate any upward movement from consult lists as more mid-range strategies make their way into the format. Najila looks really good to me, so does Food Chain Sliver. I'm excited to play Yisan more frequently, and I'm already itching to convert Opus Thief to Blue Farm. I'm psyched."
Dude, this is awesome. I'm really glad we did this. This is great swath of statements, and I think this kind of shows where the community is at generally. So
yeah,
and I don't think
really how much like this means to us.
I also don't think I've ever heard so many people say, "I play this strategy and I'm happy about this ban," like in any other format, in any other context.
Yes, I mean, like maybe like Eldrazi or like Hogak, but I don't know. Like even then, right?
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to be moving on to briefly discussing some meta implications of the ban. And so throughout this episode, we've got a couple listener questions that, before the relevant topic, we're just kind of going to read them and then transition into the actual topic kind of that they bring up in the question. So for the meta implications of the ban, Soul Bad Guy 987 asks, any insights on how the meta will shape out now that Flash is gone? And Zeke the Impaler asks, with Flash banned, will games begin to increase in speed? Since the stacks effect of Flash is gone, will decks become less value engine based and more glass cannon? So, in terms of the meta implications of the ban, on how the meta is going to shape out, we've kind of got a bird's eye view perspective on how the meta is going to transform and react to this ban, and really the focus of this discussion is going to be on meta churn. So I think, Morgan, you want to talk about this quite a bit because you had some interesting things to say about it. So I'll give the floor to you.
Sure. So like when we say churn, what we mean is that unlike before when Flash was legal and as the top deck, it was so strong that there wasn't sort of like an obvious counter. There wasn't a rock, paper, scissors of actual viable decks. It just sort of, we've reached an equilibrium and we stayed there, and people, teched a little bit one way or the other. Oh, I make my list a little more greedy because people are playing slower. I want to take the game longer, whatever it is. But now, there are actual strategies that counter consult, and then there are strategies that counter those strategies, but aren't just like completely unplayable in the face of either consult or those strategies. So I think what we're going to see is people actually sort of working through phases. They switch decks. People are playing, like people play the mid-range decks, which then is countered by people being greedy and trying to go fast because, people are sort of sparing with their interaction. And then, people are tapping out for heuristic studies on, the earlier turns of the game. So people are then playing like farm decks to try and win. And then there's some stacks, which hurts the farm decks because you got Rule of Laws and Thalias and whatever. And so we'll actually get changing based on what you're playing against, what decks are the best, and then we'll see change over time. And I think that it'll actually look a lot more like a lot of people's local playgroup metas, where it was much harder for people to just sort of switch decks. And we'll see that kind of effect where people play the decks they like. Maybe they switch decks because the metas shifted a lot. And we'll have much more diverse and sort of a much less easily defined overall overarching meta than we had before.
Yeah, it's really just about like the relative inability for the meta going forward to be like solved, as opposed to like what it looked like before.
Yeah, I think this kind of churn that we're talking about is really, a good indicator of a healthy format, because there is no solve. It's not going to reach a stable, equilibrium, and you're constantly going to have to be adapting. I think Pioneer, is it Pioneer? I remember listening to a podcast. I think like it might have been Jerry Thompson and Brian Gottlieb's podcast. I forget the name of it, but I think it's like the Arena podcast, Magic Arena podcast or something like that. They were discussing I think it was Pioneer, that by the time their episode comes out to you, it's basically out of date because the meta is shifting and adapting so quickly, and it changes over the course of from Monday, and by the time there's events going on Saturday and Sunday, things have changed. You need your deck selection might be wrong. So that's the kind of thing that I think is really healthy for this kind of format. So things aren't going to get stale. You constantly need to be aware of the direction the meta is going. How do you make the changes in your deck to compensate for that? Can you metagame the metagame? What's the best choice? What's the best deck choice into this tournament? Is there some cool tech that I can use to think 2 moves ahead? That's the kind of thing that's going to be really fun, and I think that kind of opens up the space for more viable decks, right? Well, when the meta is so chaotic, it's lots of tier 2 or I guess tier 2 decks are gonna have their moment to shine, because they're some decks are tier 2 because they're so specific in their niche that it's just very hard to find the right meta. But maybe there's going to be a time when Baral mono counter spells is viable in under specific
God,
conditions.
Please no. I played through Control Winter. It was not a fun time.
And also, I think that in terms of innovation, Flash was also one of the most punishing things to sort of anything less than perfect deck building and play.
Yeah.
I remember someone remarked, I think it was during the Kaladesh to Dominaria standard, when there was a really strong mono red aggro and a really strong mono blue tempo list that people played in standard, and it was it is impossible to try and brew or innovate because you queue up on Arena and you just get rolled by mono red and mono blue over and over. And Flash had that effect where it was if you're trying to do something spicy, and so your lists, it doesn't have doesn't have the best mana and interaction available at all times because you're focusing on your new innovative game plan.
And like, I can't quite fit the hate in to specifically hate on Hulk, so just like,
I guess I'll just die to Flash a bunch. It's like, oh, I'll try and resolve my like spicy card on turn 3. Oh, guess we died to Flash a bunch. Like,
and Flash was really ruthless on picking on like the weak link in a pod,
well,
right?
that's like even from the time of like Shuffle and D&V, right? Like that was the big strength of the decks and sort of like what they were designed around. And then like that only got stronger going forward, but it's like the whole idea of D&V and Shuffle was just to be like the best deck of the table to take advantage of people stumbling, right? Or people making misplays. Like the whole idea was you were going to be in the best place possible to take advantage of somebody doing something incorrectly. And so like as soon as you like get better and better piles into the picture, like that just got even more and more oppressive. So like you basically were forced to be playing the best deck that you could and also just make no mistakes or else you just die. Which is incredibly toxic.
Flash Hulk was absolutely a harsh mistress. I will not miss her one bit. No. Yeah, so I think one thing before we move on, and the next segment we're going to be talking about, we're going to be getting more into specifics, and this might contain the next segment will contain some more like practical advice. But before we move on, I just wanted to say, and we can all give some like closing remarks on this if we want, but don't be discouraged if your deck your pet deck that it's like, oh, the Wicked Witch is dead, let me just pull out my tier 2 deck that's got 2 inches of dust on it. Like, don't be discouraged if it doesn't work out right away. I think because of the meta churn, there is going to be a time and a place for your deck, even if it's not sitting at the top of the meta and super good. There is going to be a time and a place where you'll see results. So be patient, don't be discouraged. Feel free to explore pet decks and all that jazz. Do some crazy brewing, do some interesting combos that aren't just consults.
And I mean, there's always going to be a best deck as well, and there's always going to be like a tier. Well, maybe not a tier, but like a collection of top decks. So don't be necessarily disappointed if your pet deck doesn't like breach into that upper echelon of decks, because like not every deck can be that good, right? So like maybe just be content with the fact that you don't die to 2 mana at instant speed, and you could maybe play the game a bit more with your tier 2 deck. I know I will.
Yeah. One thing, actually, this is kind of, I was just stewing on the fact that we were talking about how Flash really necessitated perfect play, and really punished weaker decks. I think this Flash ban is actually going to be great for new players in the format, people just coming in, because a lot of the time people who are being introduced to CDH for the first time, they'll tend to want to. It's not often I don't find that people straight up net deck from the beginning. Usually, as people are getting introduced into CDH, it's because there's been some power escalation in their group, and the classic EDH arms race. So people have like tuned high power decks that they'll take into CDH pods because that's their baby that they've been working on. And I think those kinds of decks are actually going to find some amount of success in Flash Hulk, and hopefully with Flash Hulk gone, and hopefully that allows players to find their feet and learn to love the format, and not just get stomped by Flash and immediately discouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great time to be confident, because it's a great time to be forgiving. I think that's kind of like a easy summary.
Okay, so moving on, we're calling this segment a sketch of the new meta. So here we're going to be kind of outlining our takes on how we think things are going to go. So take what we're saying with a grain of salt, but I think some of these things are kind of generically accepted as the popular opinion among top CDH brewers and people who play a lot of CDH and meta experts. So you can take some solace in the fact that it's probably not absolutely incorrect advice, but we need to actually play a lot in this format in order to see how things shake out. So hopefully you can take what we're saying here and implement it and have a leg up in the early weeks of this format. But
we are professionals, technically. Technically.
So we'll start this off with a listener question. So Tegan asks, so now what? Where do you see the meta going now? Specifically, is Storm a thing again, or is Consult too strong to go all in on a strat like that? So the subtopic here is strategies and what strategies we think are going to be viable into the new format. So Matt, I think you've got this first point claimed for yourself here. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. This is, I think when I originally thought this, I didn't quite have my idea formulated, but I'll try to justify it as best as I can. But in my mind, like a mid-range strategy post flash is a bit more appealing, and that's because I think like without the threat of losing early and the uncertainty of which player is going to be the one that's going to win, committing early is great, and committing early and establishing your board state is something kind of your primary strategy as a mid-range deck. Additionally, I think with the turn 2 win being kind of set aside a bit, you can kind of trust the turn order a bit better, and therefore you get to know when it's safe to leave up mana or it's safe to commit like an early value piece, and that's once again like a property of a mid-range deck that you want to be present.
Yeah, I can definitely see that where like it's the hallmark of success for a mid-range deck is the ability to like safely tap out and the ability to like see windows where you can safely tap out to generate more value later on in the game, right?
I like with there not being this instant speed win condition, like that is just, in fact, I don't think there'll be very many instant speed win conditions at all, so like great window.
So I appreciate that viewpoint, but in order to capture the full range of things, I would like to pose an opposing idea of where mid-range will go in this meta game.
Well, allow me to retort.
But yeah, just to get all sides of the argument, and I think there are some points that might also be true, maybe simultaneously, maybe not, but I think that there are some ways where mid-range strategies will actually get worse after this. I think that the mid-range strategies that we are seeing currently right now pre-flash ban in stuff like Oracle Hulk, I don't think will quite exist as much anymore. Like decks, like stuff like decks relying on Tymna to generate draw and be able to just continuously jam out pieces while everybody's sort of stuck in a Mexican standoff, and eventually you get to the point where like the person with 5 value pieces in play wins the game because they accumulated 10 counter spells or whatever. I don't think that those types of mid-range decks are really going to exist as well anymore, just because with like less instant speed sandbagging and with less like threatening of winning on other people's turn cycles, I think it's a lot more reasonable to expect there to be more early win attempts. Just because there's like a lot less of a chance that you just get one on top of. Or like it's a lot safer to, if it makes sense, it's a lot safer to jam a combo during your own turn now.
Yeah, I guess it works. I think like the fact that there's no longer the presence of flash kind of works for both strategies in that sense then, because you know when to commit and you also know when to go off.
Yeah.
Well, I think this will again sort of be part of a meta churn in that people will play. Let's say people are playing like a Consult Timothracios list because people are obviously going to play that deck. Then there's a few people playing similar stuff, so you go, okay, I'm going to add in just like a few more greed pieces because like these games are going a little long, so like I'm going to jam, I don't know, like maybe it's Narset. You're like, I'm gonna see if I can fit Narset into this deck,
or like
just to like
put like Notion Thief with no wheels in the deck.
I mean, I think Notion Thief's just going to be in the deck either
Fair.
way. But
like, yeah,
you're like, I'm
trying to go
I'm gonna
over the
start
top.
fitting in a few more. I'm going to fit in a Narset. I'm going to see if I can fit in, like, I don't know, maybe it's like more Mimi stuff like Compost or whatever it is.
Runic Armosaur, sure.
Runic Armosaur, sure.
Yeah.
Runic Armosaur is a great example. I'm going to be tapping out, I'll cast these engines on turn 2 and turn 3, and then I'll just be set for these long games. And then people counter that by going a little greedy or going a little deeper. And then it reaches a point where everyone's trying to develop these mana engines or these value engines for the long game. And you're like, oh, you played a Smothering Tithe, you played a Faber Elder, and you played a Runic Armosaur. Food Chain? And then, like, if people get too greedy, the early wins come back, and then people start playing the early interaction to stop that, and then there's sort of natural counterplay to both of those strategies. Both people going, oh, it's safe to do early wins because Flash is gone, or it's safe to do early value engines because Flash is gone.
And I think the key to that is that the reason why that exists as a cycle now is because there aren't really many decks that can do all of it at once anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's very difficult now to have a dedicated deck that can both win as early as turn 2 with very little setup, or very consistently threaten early wins, as well as have, like, immense grind game power. You very much have to make a choice now, and I think, like, that definitely contributes a large amount.
I think Food Chain can threaten early wins and can also threaten early interaction, but can't really go long in the grind game. And like you kind of have to pick 2 of the 3 of early wins, early interaction, grind game.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, one of the biggest things that I'm kind of taking from your guys' arguments is that Flash really was suppressing the development turns. Maybe, people were not developing on turn 3 and were very trepidatious, and cautious about holding up counter spells. So things would get prolonged, and they'd be developing the development would get pushed to a point when they can both hold up interaction and develop simultaneously. And this, people might now be overconfident and taking an extra full turn to develop right as some of the earliest wins are coming online. So there seems to be a bit of pulling in opposite directions there. Interesting ideas. Now, in my opinion, I think that things are going to be, at least right off the bat, I think there's going to be a lot of just like the concept of price memory. I think there's going to be just a lot of PTSD from Hulk. I think people are going to be, I think initially things are still going to be a bit grindy. Development might, still, people are still going to be, I think, packing more interaction than we might find in a couple months. More value engines, and people might still be cautious about going for an early win. So I think initially things are probably going to be a bit grindier, but we could see things, start to people start to press that early advantage more, as Reed was saying. Yeah. Anything else in terms of strategies that you guys want to discuss?
That sounds good to me.
I mean, I think the first thing we're gonna see just like a lot of decks that people took Hulk out of and then retooled a little bit. So our console Thrasios Timna and meta staples Urza, Kess. I think the first sort of new wave of new decks we're gonna see is gonna be stacks, just because there's been a lot of like orphaned stacks players.
Just a lot of disenfranchised stacks players.
Like, I just can't play. I want to play stacks, and I just can't because I just give games to like. I give games to Hulk, or if I don't, I give them to like Najila or something every time. And now those people can play stacks, so they'll sort of come in with a vengeance. And I mean, stacks is definitely good against ad nauseum. It's not as great against just like consult, but with some teching and, you know, Hushbringers, potentially Rule of Laws, that sort of thing, are quite good against Oracle and Jace. So that will be like, I think that will be the first wave that really shakes things up, is that people will get their faces kicked in by Stax decks, and then they'll switch to some other strategy that they think is good against the Stax deck, and then slowly, you know, diversity will return to the metagame.
So before we move on to our next subcategory here, we've kind of given every answer under the sun in terms of which strategy is going to be optimal in this post Flash world. So, you know, let's try to avoid being politicians here and taking every side, and give our listeners something to use practically. So if we had to make a recommendation for a strategy, like should you be going mid-range or fast combo, or you know some kind of hybrid, or including lots of value engines, what recommendation would you give, or can we arrive on any sort of consensus for the first month or so?
I think the generic answer for this is pretty much always play a blue deck with a good amount of interaction, a bit of value generation that you can tutor for, and a good win con.
So just a good principled CEDH, generic shell, nothing too spicy.
Yeah, templated.
I think Consult Nas, Thrasios, or Consult Kess are both like extremely generic. Like they're never going to be like terrible, no matter what meta you're in, and they are like they're obviously very strong decks. So they're good as just sort of generic recommendations. I think in most metas, there would be a better choice than one of those two, but without knowing what your meta is going to look like, those choices would not. You wouldn't be able to say which of those choices would be the strongest.
And of those two, I think like they probably changed the least after this, like in regards to their pre-flash ban lists.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a boring recommendation, but I think it makes the most sense. People are going to be trying to juke the meta, so maybe just stick with something that is the meta, and everyone's juking one way, juking the other way. So just stick in the middle and play just as all around solid deck, and you'll probably see some really decent success. So our next category, and Morgan was touching on this before we started talking about that, and that is stacks. So I'm pretty sure we can all agree that stacks is going to be a lot more defining in this new meta than it was in the previous meta. And I think we've touched on this in our episode called "The Best Deck," where that was just when Thassa's Oracle was spoiled, and we talked about the Flash Hulk Consult dichotomy, where you can't hit both combos with like stacks pieces that exist, or at least it's very, very hard to. I think Hushbringer is like the closest thing, but it's not perfect either. But now that one half of that dichotomy is gone, there is now and Consult is really the win condition to target. It also happens that lots of decks that are good with Consult, like Food Chain, where you've got that great Forbidden Tutor synergy, also relies on casting multiple spells in a turn. And these decks that are running Forbidden Tutors all have greedy mana bases. So we finally have a format where stacks hits uniformly the top decks or the top strategies and combos in the format. And not only does it hit them, it also hinders their primary game plan. So doesn't just stop the combo, which Grafdigger's Cage did.
It's a huge difference to what types of stacks pieces were effective against Flash.
Yeah,
right.
Grafdigger's Cage was only stopping their combo, and they're sitting there drawing infinite cards with Thrasios and Tymna, and sandbagging counter spells to the end of time. But these rule of law effects, moon effects. They're stopping the ability. They're hindering their ability to actually cast their combo pieces in one turn, or protect their combo pieces, or stick a lot of development. So this is really the stacks renaissance in CDH, I think.
It's basically the
absolutely.
revival of the rule of law.
Yeah. So do anyone want to go? I mean, I kind of mentioned rule of law, blood moon, and back to basics. Those are really like the standard, standard stacks pieces. That blood moon and rule and back to basics are kind of carryovers from the previous format, where obviously it's hard to imagine a time when blood moon and rule of law is going to be, or blood moon and back to basics is going to be bad, because everyone's on these greedy mana bases with tainted pact. But rule of law, very important as well. I think, and there's a few other pieces if we want to discuss them.
I think we're going to see a lot more of the 3-ball. I think Trinisphere took a major dive from having single spell wins in the format, and now that we're back to having to cast multiple spells in a turn for the most part to win the game, I think Trinisphere is a huge boon.
Interesting, yeah. I haven't heard many people discussing 3-ball, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I can definitely get behind that.
I also think stuff like I think particularly this is a big one. Root Maze might be able to come back in select decks. I think like Root Maze wasn't particularly great, especially against like the Dork heavy decks, just because of the combination of Dork mana as well as very, very mana efficient wins that didn't require a lot of colors. But now it's sort of like Root Maze definitely makes it difficult to cast Oracle plus Consult, just because Dorks just don't make that mana.
Speaking of dorks as well, Curse Totem. I don't think Curse Totem has really gotten any worse in terms of just, it's not stopping the combo engines in terms of food chain or consult, but it does definitely hinder development because green is as strong as ever. Nothing beats the consistency of the green mana dorks in the format. So being able to stop that and turn off Thrasios activations if people are going to be leaning on those for value. So,
and I know it's technically not stacks, but along that line, also I think board wipes are going to be a lot stronger against like sort of more mid-rangey console decks than they were against Flash.
And speaking of board wipes and removal, so we're going to be getting to that in the next section, which is interaction. But I think we're going to see a massive uptick in these kinds of effects due to this next card that we're going to be talking about, which I think is going to be quite, I don't want to say meta defining, but it's going to be meta warping, and not I don't want to say meta warping because in the same sentence, Flash is meta warping.
It's not really meta warping.
It's going to be changing the effect. It's going to be changing the types of decks people are selecting. It's going to be putting some pressure on higher CMC decks that are commander focused, and it's also going to be dictating that people run more single target creature removal and board wipes.
I think
the card we are talking about is of course Granath Magistrate, and that's from the new
our new 2 mana.
Yeah.
It's
Overlord.
really just like, I think, just to get it out there, I think anybody that's done any amount of testing with it so far, I mean, it hasn't exactly been like legal for, I don't think it's been legal for ranked leagues yet, but I mean, just for having played the card and tested it, I definitely think like it's going to be a major focus. Or, well, a major pain point for a lot of decks, as well as something that's going to see a large amount of play.
Yeah, does someone want to read the card, because it is technically a new card?
It is a 2-mana 1/3. It casts for 1 and a white, and it says, your opponents cannot cast spells from anywhere other than their hands.
Which, of course, means you cannot cast your commander if it is in the command zone. Yikes.
Yeah, it's just...
Yeah, it's also non-symmetrical, so there's pretty much no reason why you shouldn't run it in your white deck.
very big incentive to be running white.
It doesn't even just stop commanders. It also stops. I think we went over this in our past episode, one episode ago, or we might have. But yeah, it stops commanders. It stops like cast from casting from graveyard when she's in play.
Stops
Underworld
breach.
It stops food chain. You can't cast stuff from exile to win with food chain. So cast from exile creatures don't work. Shuts off Urza. Urza activations don't work anymore. Yeah, it's
honestly,
just,
I think this card's just like Urza's worst nightmare.
Oh yeah, no, it's
like,
like
it's often going to get into play before Urza. You're not going to have ways of permanently dealing with it, and you like struggle to win through it.
Yeah,
because it shuts off your activations. It's actually brutal. It also shuts off Scepter.
Yeah, you also can't win with Scepter.
But and this is very interesting, and we learned it just last night. It does not stop God Eternal Kefnet.
No. It doesn't stop God Eternal Kefnet's ability. Let's be very clear here.
Yes. Because the copies are created in your hand and then cast from your hand.
It's so strange. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think some of the incidental effects here are actually going to be relevant in the same way that I think Grafdigger's Cage being, a very cheap, efficient way to answer or to sort of answer Flash Hulk had some knock-on effects in terms of, really punishing Yisan and decks that want to use leverage casting cards from the graveyard heavily. So Breach decks, Yawgmoth's Willstorm, Cass. So the prevalence of Cage was kind of hurting those cards and suppressing. I think Dranath's Magistrate is going to have a similar kind of effect. Again, incentivizing people away from Breach, maybe some cast activations and Yawgmoth's Will and Food Chain, and also just high costed commanders.
Commander-centric strategies in general. Yeah.
If your deck relies on having your commander in play and your commander costs more than like 3 mana, good luck.
Also, another like interesting effect that I suspect that we might see from this is that it will encourage people, and not just this, they're much more playable now, and also the prevalence of things like Tymna and Najeela will encourage people, particularly those with higher cost commanders, that they in like the 4 mana range, that they often rely on for blocking Tymnas and Najeelas, and like that, you play them and they're like your defensive body. I think we will see an uptick in like slightly more mid-rangey creatures because they are a little bit safer to cast in the early turns of the game, and you can't necessarily rely on getting your commander in play as easily, and Tymna is still every bit as real a card as she was last week.
Yeah,
so
Tymna definitely doesn't get any worse from the flash ban, so to say.
I do think it gets easier to play counters to her.
Dude, Dranath's Magistrate 1/3, great Tymna blocker.
See, the thing about that is that
great Tymna attacker.
It's also a great Tymna attacker because it both attacks for Tymna and stops opposing Tymnas and Thrasioses from coming down.
Oh god. Dude, why does it have to be a 1/3? Why can't it die to Pyroclasm?
And the issue with this is like, as well as that fact, the whole thing. This is getting to speculative territory, but from my brewing brain, from like what I'm looking at when I try to salvage Thras Tymna from the flash ban. I guess salvage isn't even a word because you don't really have to salvage anything. They're just good by default. But
you're so hard done by when I try to how are you going to manage?
When I try to rebuild after taking out like the appendix that is flash from the body of Thrasios Tymna, I'm really like, you really look at playing more like to board creature tutors in a more console centric type of deck, because the reason you didn't necessarily want to play those is because your main win conditions really came from a lot of the time having Hulk in hand. So you're really more interested in playing like Whirly Tutor and just like stuff to get Hulk into hand rather than like trying to get smaller stuff on board. You still play Neoform, but that's just because it's a good card on its own. I think with an uptick,
run Eldritch Evolution.
I think with an uptick, it didn't. Oracle Hulk didn't run Eldritch Evolution.
No, I said, are you going to run Eldritch Evolution?
This is what I'm saying. So I think there's a very real chance that we see an uptick in 2-board creature tutors, such as Finale of Devastation, Eldritch Evolution, potentially Court of Calling. in like these dedicated Oracle decks, and I think that's a real issue because of their combination with Granath Magistrate, where because we're playing these creature tutors, there's now just the issue that Granath Magistrate is going to come down on turn 2 so much more often because of that. And it's going to be a real issue if you can't get your commander down like before an opposing turn 2. Because I think there's
Court
going to be...
is also a good way to cheese instant speed wins with Authorical.
Oh yeah, that too. But I mean, like,
interesting.
I think that with a potential uptick into board tutors, it's really going to be more of an issue than just like, oh, he just had it, or oh, he just like really tiered for it, and those are like the only things that go and get it efficiently.
Yeah. And the turn 2 wipes additionally don't really deal with Granath, so you're kind of stuck on like single target removal as far as like turn 2, turn 3, which can be a problem like in terms of keeping advantage in the game.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem hard to convince myself to neoform a dork into a Granath Magistrate on turn 2. Also, super gross in that it's a 2/4, and if I'm playing Dimna, it's basically infinitely large. Although, again, I think that will be less true than it is now with regards to creature stats.
Potentially,
like, 2/4 is still big, but like I think 2/2 will be a lot less big than it was. I think that there's a lot of stuff that effectively blocks that kind of stat line that is much more playable now.
So we're looking at the turn 3, turn 4 wipe, turn 5 commander game plan. Uptick in 5 CMC plus commanders.
Okay, so our next question comes from BendingGuy, and he asks, does Scepter make a comeback in Thrasios and other Bug X decks, or does Consult become the only win for these mid-range value type decks?
So I think the correct answer for the reality of the situation here is that, and like it answering in respect to what will happen, is that I think Scepter will make a comeback in a lot of people's decks. That being said, I don't think Scepter should make a comeback. If that makes sense.
Kind of
I think a lot of people are going to go back to classic CST and try to make that deck work again. But I think that it really is not worth it to run Scepter with the printing of Thoracle. It's just way like it just makes the win condition way too compact. There's pretty much no downside. Like there's no hate that hits Oracle that like you need to offset by playing a secondary win condition. You can basically just be completely safe on that front.
The other like unfortunate thing for people looking to play Scepter is that it does also get hit by Granath Magistrate.
Yeah.
And Rule of Law.
And Rule of Law, both of which we'll see upticks. I do think that like there will be a part of some of the churn that we'll see where these effects like will be playable. Probably when people are switching off of like people are playing a bunch of greedy creature decks to beat the stacks decks. The stacks players can switch to like something like a Kess with the board wipes, with the anti-creature hate, and it's possible Scepter winds up maybe not in specifically Kess, but if people were playing like a blue-red deck, or you know something like Kikar, I think that there will be a part where that's playable, but there's just so many counters to it that it won't ever be, it will never come back to being like a staple the way it was in like 2017.
Yeah, I think it might be time to declare infinite mana combos in Thrasios pretty sufficiently dead.
That's wild.
Like I think Thrasios
that is honestly crazy
might,
to think.
or at least Thrasios in the context of Thrasios Timna might honestly just be a value engine at this point. Like I'm not sure anybody could convince me that there's a real argument to playing infinite mana combos.
Dockside.
If you want to concede that you're going to play Baron in a deck, sure. In the year of our Lord 2020.
Yeah.
Dude, I love Teamer Sabretooth. Just the giant 4/3 indestructible.
Yeah,
Oh, man.
okay. I just want to state that, like, and this is fully my fault. I just, for the longest time, for like a good 2 years of having played decks with Teamer Sabertooth in them, using it to win the game, I did not know that it gained indestructible.
my
it was
That's awesome.
this year that I learned that it gives itself indestructible. And I
Oh,
played
man.
Soulfall as my first deck. I helped create Hackball, which uses it as a combo piece. I played Dockside decks, like
I mean, reading is hard.
yeah, I mean apparently so, right?
Both parsing text and being read.
Okay, so one thing we also want to cover in this category is that, and this kind of relates. A lot of these categories kind of intertwine with each other and call back, but the fact that non-land mana sources are going to be as fragile as ever. And as we already covered, your lands, your land-based mana sources are also going to be fragile if you're on a tainted pact mana base. So, I think mana hate is going to be the name of the game in a lot of of
And
metas.
it just
Expect your mana to be
just
denied.
in general, it's a lot safer to deny mana when the color requirements and mana requirements now are 3 colored sources that dorks can't make, as opposed to a single colored source. Like, yeah.
Blood Moon and Back to Basics are not just for stacks decks. Like they fit into a lot of decks, and that just covers
hyped
the
to
3.
play Acknowledgements.
I definitely,
man, I'm gonna have fun.
I definitely think that, like, if you have a personal vendetta against Tainted Pact or Consult, and you just don't feel like playing it in your deck, and it's just not something you're interested in, I think it's very hard to justify, if you're not doing that, then not just playing Blood Moon and Back to Basics.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, get at my enchantment-based mana sources.
Oh man, dude,
Yeah, so-
I'm just gonna jam those Nature's Lures and you can't stop me. All basic mana bases, land ramp, free casual now.
So
I mean,
yes,
like,
some
you're
okay, Morgan. Go ahead.
I know it was said kind of as a joke, but like I don't hate Nature's Lore or 3 visits. Like the two mana sorcery speed ramp spells that bring a land in untapped. If your meta doesn't have a ton of the Blood
A
Moon
forest.
and does have like Dork hate and potentially Rock hate, Nature's Lore doesn't compare too unfavorably to a Signet or Talisman.
I think it's really important that we say that they bring forests in,
Forests untapped.
because like that means that you're very tempted to put your duels into play, and duels are susceptible to Back to Basics and Blood Moon.
Yeah, they're not great if everyone's playing Blood Moon, but and you're gonna need to be fetching not just basic forests, but if you think that you can find duels reasonably safely, then they compare quite favorably to Signets
absolutely.
or Talismans.
Yeah, so we just want, before we wrap up this segment, we'll say, in terms of the artifact mana, it's just as easily hated now as it was in the past. In fact, we've seen a steady trend away from artifact mana towards dork-based mana. I think maybe like a couple of years ago, it used to be more of like an even split. Now it's heavily skewed towards dorks. Timna Winter, very, 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 very cold. Not getting any warmer. Dorks are good. They're attackers. Draw cards. Yeah, so Urza, Kaikar, those are reasons to build into artifacts. Scepter, we said is bad. Null Rod and Oof, I'm not sold on these cards right now, just because of how good dorks are. Expect there to be churn, as we've discussed. That's a big trend. So people start transitioning away from dorks into rock decks. That are, if people are running like Opus Thief and Kess and all these non-green decks with rocks. You can take a look at Null Rod and Oof. I still think that Null Rod effects are not where you want to be in terms of trying to have your deck be prepared for like generic metas.
So
and they're kind of susceptible. Like if you're going to play, if you're playing into those, into rock based metas where they're casting creature board wipes, then you probably don't want to be running something like Collector Oof.
So what you're saying is
cents.
we all just play Meltdown into blind metas now.
Yeah, of
pretty
course,
much.
of course. Everyone's just running the hate for everything else, meltdowns going left and right, anger of the gods, all the good stuff.
Okay, Morgan, you see, we're playing both sides now, so we get everybody to run Meltdown and everybody else to run the Pyroclasms, and then we just go straight to lane ramp. Get them down the middle.
Reed, we've already discussed Pyroclasms. We'll get into again in interaction, but Pyroclasms just aren't going to cut it anymore with this nasty 1/3 running around.
Okay. I mean, they're not ideal. I think they're still very good. And like you said, Timna Winter's not getting any warmer. I think Timna's just as gross as she always was, but I think it is easier to play things that counter her. And I think we will see some more of that. And if creatures are being attacked heavily, then people might be switching to artifacts, and then Null Rod, Collector Oof become, maybe not Collector Oof if creatures are still being attacked, but Null Rod and Stony Silence as well.
Or you could just run good old fashioned Seeds of Innocence if you're in green.
Yeah.
Instead of the Meltdown.
Meltdown, even I've loved Bifrost in Kess for a very long time. That card has just, not once everyone started playing Flash Hulk, but
But prior to that point,
just did so much work.
I think Bifrost is probably it replaced Shattering Spree or not Shattering Spree. Sorry, it replaced Vandal Blast, and I'm sort of sad about that because Vandal Blast is a sick design, but. Continue.
Yeah. It's great in the decks where you really don't want to be playing Meltdown in Kess with your 15 artifacts. But yeah, so I do think there will be a point when anti-artifact hate is good, but that point will not be right away.
And our actual final last point on the category of stacks is good riddance to Rest in Peace and Grafdigger's Cage.
Yeah, get out of here.
Yes.
If you're a Gitrog player, you're rejoicing about Rest in Peace being gone. And out of all the stack pieces we've mentioned,
I'm so happy.
Do you know who is very, very happy? Yisan players, dude. They're just loving this moment right now. Yisan plays well into Rule of Law, plays well into the non-basic land hate, plays well without the fact there's no Graph Cage is great for Yisan.
The only problem is that it doesn't play well into opponents with CEDH decks.
Yeah, poor.
It's just part of the charm, man. You can
players.
hate.
So the next category is interaction, and we already touched on this a bit, but I'm pretty sure that Granath Magistrate being such an important part of the meta is going to incentivize more single target creature removal to be included in decks, as well as board wipes. And I think these board wipes, I think Toxic Deluge has been on decline in CDHX for a while, and I think it's about to see a decent
I think we're probably going to see an uptick in Deluge, just because it's so much better when you can actually play non-green decks now, which are way more likely to want Toxic Deluge.
Yeah, and also an important point is, as we were discussing on Pyroclasms and what kinds of board wipes you want. Massacre was something that was seeing play to help answer Timnas and Dorks, but if you're trying to cast your commander and you're locked by this Granath Magistrate, your Massacre is not looking so hot.
I'm still.
I'm still probably playing Plasms, and I'm not going to go that far. I think an uptick in spot removal is probably correct for murdering Granath.
I don't know, man. I'm thinking that the three damage wipes in for the red decks that were on Plasms are quite real to,
the problem is
to
that
consider.
A lot of them are double red.
Yeah,
that's true.
Very awkward.
That's true.
Yeah.
Although Radiant Flames could be spicy because it doesn't have to be 3 if you don't want it to be 3.
And if you really want it, volcanic fallout is not counterable.
but it's
So
also
that's only
it's
2 damage.
Yeah. That's fair.
But
Yeah, the unfortunate part about Massacre is you really want to recast it with Kess, but you can't do that if it's being locked out by a train.
I still think you play Massacre and Kess.
Oh,
that's just
Yeah, you
so
absolutely do.
gross.
Yeah, I'm just meaning.
I think another. I guess we'll. Never mind. We'll get into this a little bit later after the next section, but it's somewhat related to the removal people will be playing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's so people are going to be aware. People are going to be running wipes and removal.
Also,
And
spot
you should
removal
be
is,
running-
spot removal is
running.
definitely going up again because there's a lot more. There's a lot more things that you can stop with it now, in general.
Yeah. And so Reed, you've got a point here.
Yeah. So this is less about the unban and more about current spoilers and printings. There's the whole cycle of free interaction for as long as you control your commander that was spoiled / printed. And I think it's really going to shape some decks going forward, considering that they really incentivize playing commanders with lower CMCs just so you get access to all these frankly like insane interactive spells.
Yeah. Crazy
Just
effects.
keep stuff like turning Thrasios.
Why is there this new cycle of free
turning
counter magic?
Thrasios into a negate
Why?
or a misdirection that can also misdirect abilities for free.
Yeah, like imagine having red with Thrasios and then just having
This was
2 free counter spells.
So
unnecessary.
I mean, you guys might not be following this because I know none of you care about Curious Control. Maybe you do, Morgan.
That's not true. I played Curious Control for many months.
But we recently have updated the deck due to these spoilers. Of course, we haven't updated it to take the Craftier's Cage out yet. But with these new updates, we put in 3 of the new free interactive spells. So we're on the free negate,
The black
we're on
one,
the red misdirect, and we're on the black exile for free because it's just. They're so good with a Curiosity on Vial Smasher, and you're casting all of your stuff anyway. It's just honestly ridiculous.
Dome people for 4.
Well, dumbing people, but also
with the-
tapping out to play like Vial Smasher plus a Curiosity effect, and then people try to remove it, and you're just like, nope, not doing that. Let me draw a card.
Yeah,
and
I've been a
doing
fan
that.
of misdirection for a long time, and Force of Negation, even though people are like, it's like mediocre in some decks. It's like being able to tap out and feel confident in having your board secure and prevent direction. I mean, this is more of a thing in the Hulk meta where you had to constantly be aware of not tapping out to allow the Flash Hulk win. So having misdirection to help in counter wars or Force of Negation answer, that kind of stuff. Always been a fan of that, and now this is just incentivizing that kind of strategy even more.
Although I do think Force of Negation definitely got a lot less good.
Yeah, I'd say so as well.
Yeah.
Honestly, like an easier condition to satisfy is having your commander rather than choosing a card in your hand to exile,
And also it not being your
and not
turn.
being your turn. Yeah. Yeah, and that point on misdirection also applies with deflecting spot. Like you just sometimes it's hard to exile that one card, and with deflecting spot, it's like you really are set up pretty often to not
imagine
have to.
not being able to misdirect Gilded Drakes.
Yeah, I am.
God,
garbage
it's
is that?
so
Yeah.
disgusting.
It's also like pretty. It's not great that this is yet another cycle of cards that really pushes people towards playing
Play commanders.
like low cost commanders,
Yeah.
particularly
More
partners,
colors,
more colors.
Because partners are on average quite low CMC, especially the powerful ones.
Yeah.
This is all basically to say that Kenrith is at an all-time low and go play Najila instead.
Yeah.
Honestly,
rest
this
in
cycle,
peace, my year
kind
prediction.
of upsets me. I don't see what the case was
It felt
for
pretty
printing these.
uninspired.
Yeah, honestly.
They're just uninspired, and they're really good, and they encourage people to not do fun things with them.
But that being said, this is unfortunately not the let's all pile on play design podcast because we already did that one. So we need to move on and continue covering meta updates.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
These are legal cards you have to consider.
Next subject, we've also got some free spells in here, and that's the strength of single target artifact enchantment removal. So Force of Vigor, Natural State are cards that I think are going to be definite considerations to bring into your deck as the flex slot, I guess, depending on your meta. But enchantments are there's been an increasing trend in strong value-based enchantments, and that's just been creeping up over time to the point where steel enchantment is not even that spicy tech. People are running in all kinds of lists just to, that's my rule of law now. That's my silver library. that's my
rule of law now. Oh, that's
my carpet.
Dude, I only target rule of laws if I steal enchantment.
Wait, did I say rule of law? I meant to say heuristic study. I meant to say heuristic study.
That's 100% the most productive use of my steal enchantment. Well, yes, I would like to take a rest in peace.
Mega flex. But yeah, so I think Force of Vigor and Natural State are going to be great. Food Chain we've talked about, going to be a very strong deck. So being able to answer that kind of win condition, answering people's value engines, answering rule of laws if you're trying to win as a consult deck. These are going to be important aspects. So I think running Force of Vigor, Natural State, Nature's Claim, all the standard removal spells, and then it's going to be something to look at and consider.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be sorry, go ahead.
I think it'll be hard to pick exactly what your removal suite is, especially because it's going to be hard to pick the sweet spot for enchantment removal because in such a diverse meta, you do have to take into account a lot. So I think as part of the churn, there'll be points where enchantments are clearly dominant, and there'll be parts of the churn where people catch on to that and decide that they're going to spend most of their removal slots to deal with enchantments. And
it'll be interesting, people needing both to play more creature removal and more artifact and enchantment removal, where that sort of shakes out and which cards people decide are and are not good enough in those roles.
Yeah, I think things like steel enchantment are going to be the kind of meta slots where it's if enchantments are big right now, things are grindy, we're going to bring in steel enchantment. But I think Force of Vigor, maybe not Natural State, but Force of Vigor, Nature's Claim, Trophy and Decay, those are the kinds of effects that are going to be more or less consistent and churn independent.
Honestly,
people are going to play Trophy and Decay. Hot takes from Lyndon in
honestly though, I do think that we might have gone over this multiple times before, but I really do think that Force of Vigor has really proven itself as in the upper echelon of removal spells. As long as you're playing dorks at all, it's just God, it's so good.
Whoops!
Paying full cost for a Force of Vigor is not even the worst.
No, seriously, it's legitimately.
So our last kind of mini segment here before we actually talk about our picks for the winners and losers in terms of actual decks is on the speed of the format. So how do you guys think that this we're losing the fastest deck in the format? How is everything gonna are we just chopping off that and kind of staying the same? Are things going to transition to be slower? I mean, things were already getting grindy with Hulk around in kind of a paradoxical effect that we covered before. How is this going to shake out? In terms of speed?
I feel like when people talk about deck speed, there's kind of two factors that often get rolled into one. Flash was the fastest deck in the format in that if you wanted to, you could have the lowest goldfish number. But it wasn't the fastest deck in the format in terms of normal play patterns and when it was looking to win. And so I think that now we will see decks that are actually trying to be fast be more popular, and that will be somewhat balanced against the more mid-range popularity that Matt was talking about earlier. And I think it will depend on the balance in every meta. We will see some super greedy consult deck, consult greed grind mirrors that just, it's like, all right, we're each going to draw 70 cards and just one for one each other until one of us like has one less value engine over the course of 10 turns, and that makes the difference. And we will also see like, whoops, we all tapped out for our greedy stuff on turn 3 and died to food chain. Like,
yeah, there's kind of two mindsets. There's the players who want to build the decks that, you know, are going to win the race, like, you know, win the sprint, I guess. And then the players who want to build the decks that, you know, kind of can go as long as possible without just, you know, being unfocused.
and I think also the decks that, like the sprint decks, are much more viable, not just because they might work a little better, but also because you're much less likely to lose if you don't win. Like, it's not just, oh, I tried to win turn 3, I got stopped, the Flash Hulk player, like, untapped and won.
Yeah, it's a lot less likely that like the dedicated grind decks are going to be taking advantage of windows early in the game.
Yeah, I think that the moral of the story is that the speed of the format is going to be dependent on which, you know, cycle of the churn we're in. Kind of the theme for the
I think that should just be called the
podcast.
podcast, like the title of the podcast, even though it is a Ben Flash episode.
Okay, so moving on into our list of winners and losers. So, in terms of winners, Morgan, Matt, Reed, do you guys want to
Sure.
list some
Yeah,
stuff?
so
Consult
yeah,
Gracios.
that's a big winner.
I disagree.
Yes.
Hot takes. Okay,
Wow.
Morgan, elaborate.
I don't think its comparison to every other deck in the meta improved. I think, like, obviously it was kind of the next best thing, so now it's the best thing, and I guess that's one way in which you could call it a winner. But I think if you compare it to pretty much any other deck, I think it's less good against them now than it was before. Or like it's less good against all the meta excluding Flash than it was before.
My reasoning is, I think it's the best deck you can put Granath into, and I think it's the best deck to play against other people having Granath in their deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
That's also reasonable.
It does win I guess I don't think it won that much from the Flash ban. It definitely wins a lot from the Granath and Magistrate printing, and also Fierce Guardianship to a lesser extent.
The other one that I have here is non-Hulk graveyard decks. Basically anything that wanted to use the graveyard at all won huge with this banning. Like Razakets is like at probably an all-time high, right? From this, I have to say, like in comparison to the rest of the stuff in the format.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to qualify this, right? So it's
this is
non-Hulk graveyard decks that don't do specific things that interfere or that get hosed by some of the hate we've talked about, right? Are you trying to do Yawgmoth's Will or Underworld Breach stuff and run into Rule of Laws and Granath Magistrate? Probably not looking so hot. You know, you're trying to reanimate Razaketh? Okay, well, goodbye. Rest in peace is gone. Graph Cage is gone. So you're laughing.
Reanimating Keterik Leviathan or Jin Cataxius, right? Like just stuff that's actually good into Rule of Law.
And like Getrog, you know, my
it's just the stuff that
Well, I was gonna say it got better in terms of losing like Rest in Peace and whatnot, but it got, you know, dinged significantly by the existence of being a commander centric deck that's, you know, a 5-drop commander. So Granath Magistrate is, you know, really punishing for that.
It's really about like
there's some trade-offs.
The big winners are the things that use the graveyard in a way that doesn't cast things from the graveyard or like move. Yeah, I guess like cast things from the graveyard. But that like are really going to benefit from a downtick in Rest in Peace and Grafdigger's Cage, because like obviously it's not super efficient to just run those in the blind anymore. You really actually do have to have a justification to be putting Rest in Peace and Cage into your decks over, say, more Stormy Hate or more generic hate pieces that are better against the wider field. So like really like especially Cats is going to gain a lot from this.
And I think
I kind of miss the like reanimate visit Villas hype, so I'm kind of happy I can get back on that.
Yeah. The other thing is like I think that a lot of the decks you're describing also fall into what I'm now calling decks with mid-tier card quality, which is decks that have an easier time, like more ways of actually winning than just like consult meta ball. Then they're well positioned to take advantage of the greed, and like the consult decks are really good at playing the game that Flash forced everyone to play, but like they're not necessarily as good against people like playing spells that need to be answered sort of more frequently. And so like something like Razakats, where you have like this, decently large package of reanimation enablers, or like more, maybe in something like Kess, you're probably still on consult, but leaning a little bit more heavily into the storm, even if that dilutes your card quality a little bit, or whatever people settle on in blue-red. I think that those decks just become like infinitely more playable.
2020 is the year of the tendies, man.
When it's not just like a card quality off.
Tendies in every deck. Let's do it.
Along those same sort of lines, I'd say a huge winner from this entire ordeal is the Definitely Not Viral's package / the IRL Academy Rector that I own that I haven't gotten to play in actual months. Huge. I'm gonna love putting an Academy Rector into play.
Yeah, and I think we already touched on some of the other decks that won a bit, like Yesan but there lots of decks have won. I think some of the biggest winners are just like tier 2 through 1.5 now being playable. But yeah, let's talk about the losers. Boo. Number 1 on the losers list.
Huge loser.
Actually, a massive
strategies.
Loser. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm glad she's a loser, and that's Anna Fenza. Yeah, I mean the deck was built to be an anti-meta deck against Hulk, and incidentally Gitrog and Razakats, and the number 1 deck that it was hating on just poof.
Up in smoke.
So her ability is
its whole existence was nullified.
Yeah, totally useless. Although
that's 100 to 0.
The thing with Anna Fenza is the core of the deck. Like the deck is built on a commander independent shell. So the idea was just to get an early Anna Fenza and then doing Razaketh, hate bearsy kind of stuff. That's still a viable game plan. So I think I'm going to transition my Anna Fenza deck into something like Timna Ikra, but not going to do the full farm turbo ad nauseum thing, and maybe kind of stick with a just Razaketh hate bears, maybe a bit staxier value oriented build, and I'll see how that goes.
For the record, this makes me so much more likely to enjoy playing with Lyndon in real life.
Yeah.
Just bust out the Anna Fenza. Her cries. Yeah.
That's the worst. But now it's not. Yay.
Or it's the opposite.
It's actually
it wasn't worse.
Turbo Granath Magistrate.
The banning of Flash was actually a huge personal win for me, because it means I got to play my favorite strategy without people hating on it.
Yeah, Reed is no longer a supervillain, so that's great.
I feel like this whole podcast has just been us dumping on the person Reed used to be.
I'm a new man. I'm reformed. I've gone to rehab.
So
I'm not addicted to Flash anymore.
Our next loser, Reed, you want to get this one?
Big loser is primary Scepter strategies. So decks that are looking to utilize Scepter as their primary goal. We sort of touched on this earlier, but the fact that, first of all, Oracle has basically obsoleted it in most cases, and the fact that, on the other hand, Granath Magistrate basically means that it is going to see unprecedented levels of main deck hate for it is rough. to say the least.
And also rule of laws.
The triple whammy. Yeah. Okay. Morgan, you want to get this last one?
Sure. So the last one is wheels. And first of all, these were generally pretty nice against Hulk because they were when people were trying to sandbag their wins in their hand, committing a wheel was something that non-Hulk players at the table were often okay with letting it resolve, which meant that you didn't have, you could deal with a flash in someone's hand without presenting something that if it resolved, you won, and therefore attracting a bunch of counter magic from non-Hulk players. And just the style of that also, if a whole bunch of people are just trying to accumulate massive amounts of card advantage, and then you're just like, and let's just reset this. That also sort of played really well against those strategies. And I think another reason it's a big loser is that we're going to be seeing a lot of the Opus Thief pieces, even in decks that aren't specifically playing wheels. And if everyone at your table has a Notion Thief and a Smothering Tithe in their deck, the odds that one of them is in play is pretty high when you go to cast your wheel.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that wraps it up for the winners and losers. I mean, there's some
broad
more
strokes,
that we could have. There's. Let us know how your deck won or lost in the Discord.
I think one of the losers was decks that took advantage of there not being blockers. I think that
Expect blockers, yeah.
I think that people should be expecting blockers, and that means that decks like things like Timna and Najila, they're both still good, but I do think they actually lose a decent amount from I think that sort of the tempo idea that they had doesn't really apply anymore when there's not the pressure from Flash in the same way.
Well,
I'm kind of on the opposite end because I think with Flash, there were so many Timnas that I felt like I couldn't build a deck that wasn't ready to block. And now that maybe there are going to be fewer Timnas just due to variety, I can maybe feel safer with strategies that have a looser block plan. That being said, though, the power of Timna, an uncontested Timna is absolutely ingrained in my mind forever. So let's see.
Yep. Okay. And so the last thing we want to talk about before we wrap up the show is going to be the decks we're going to play into the meta.
Oh yeah.
So we'll go through, read.
Yeah, this is what everyone's
all right,
waiting
I got
for.
a bunch.
Unleash on the public what's
okay, so first of all, Trolls Rise Up. It is now Varal's time in the sun. I'm gonna be getting some mileage.
Isn't Trolls and Sun a bit of a
no, don't worry about it. I'm gonna get some mileage out of my Varals. He looks like he's in a better position now than he's been in a long time, so definitely gonna be jamming that. Varals is actually,
dude, put in Death Shadow,
good,
man.
thanks.
Make a big Varals. Do it.
Varals?
Honestly, I never thought I'd be voting for Varals, but I'm actually genuinely voting for Varals. I think it's I'm happy that you decided to put that in your list.
Varals, the whole thing with Varals, though, is that, so I mentioned this in pre-show, but so the biggest issue with Varals is consistency. We all know this, I've talked about it ad nauseum. You just don't have the tutor density to find Entombs or get Hulk into the bin consistently enough. But outside of that, the other biggest issue is just people playing hard Grave Hate and not relying on soft Grave Hate, or just not playing soft or hate at all. So with the downtick in Grave Hate that's probably going to come along with this, I think Varals actually picks up a fair amount of space, because I remember the time when I was having the most success with the deck was really when the meta was filled with Storm Hate and Storm, which is sort of close to what we have now. So I'm very excited. I think Varals does incredibly well into Rule of Laws, and I'm pretty happy to try him out again.
I'm just so happy that the Hulk decks are
Interesting
like
again.
fringe now. Yeah,
Non-blue.
dude.
Okay.
I'll be when I see Viral's Hulk, when I see Viral's, in my pod, I will just have the biggest smile on my face. Be like, yes, this is the dream that we all strove for and we achieved. Just pure bliss.
We all wanted a nerfed Hulk, and we got a nerfed Hulk.
Yeah, pretty much.
But that doesn't mean it's gone.
That being said, my next one is playing various flashless D&V shells. So good old Thrasios Timna Menace with all of our favorite Shuffle Hulk memes, just without the flash. That's gonna be fun. I have a couple of builds floating around that I'm gonna look at trying out. Some with Oracle, some without. We'll see. Definitely gonna get some use out of my Academy Rector. Thank you very much. Also, all of them are gonna be with Valras Shapeshifter, because I've said that I've said it so many times. I've wanted to play it for the longest time. I just needed an excuse, and Flash Beam Band is the excuse. I'm now playing Valras Shapeshifter in all my decks.
Nice.
After that, I got some 4 and 5 color Hermit Druid brews on the stovetop on the back burner. We'll see where those go. They might be relegated to online play only, so I don't have to proxy them up, but who knows? Maybe we'll get there. And finally, I'm going to get to play some 4-color Ashmi / Curious Control without the Graph Figures Cage. So we have a new slot.
Awesome.
Nice.
Morgan, what do you got? What do you got cooking?
I mean, I'm still going to play my Consult Cats. I'm going to probably put some work into Sad Farm. I might convert it to 4-color because Breach is really good. Which is Timna Silas, Turbo Ad Nauseum. I'm very excited to be playing Inala with Blood Moons and Board Wipes. And I'm probably going to put together some sort of stacks deck. I'm currently leaning towards Marath. But I don't know, I just really like that card. And I think I'm going to convert the first sliver, which I haven't played in forever, into Kezer and Ukima, and play that.
Nice.
And also whatever meme strikes my fancy week to week, because that's what I do.
Matt, what about you?
So my kind of like dream paper setup, like the 3 decks that I would like to have, like for any meta, as far as like, the immediate future, I would pick Thrasios Timna Consult, probably leaning towards a mid-range build, just because that complements the other 2 decks, which are Urza, and that I think that'd be built as kind of a traditional Urza, not really on the polymorph plan. Leaning maybe, I don't know, I'm still like not quite set on the Urza, but I think Urza is probably one of the stronger stacks decks coming out of this, and then Kess as just a pure console list, dealing kind of more with the creature-based meta. Besides those 3, the regular brews, like literally Thrasios brews.
Nice.
I've been kind of messing around with like a Luris Infinite Granath's deck, but we'll see.
Damn. Okay. For myself, I'll be sticking with Gitrog, even though I'm a bit nervous about how it's going to perform into the Dranath's Magistrate meta. I'm just going to stick with it. Probably my favorite deck of all time. Anafenza, I've already touched on. I'm going to be converting that into a Timna Ikra deck, but still keeping the Raspberry Shell. And my Zur deck, I'm probably going to disassemble into either 1 or 2 different decks. So I'm probably going to do, I was looking at a Yuriko kind of just consult, not really doing the Yuriko, not doing turn and burn, not doing like, all in ninjas burn, but more of just kind of like a principled consult doomsday deck. That runs some solid value engines. So maybe Yuriko and maybe Riel from
Dude, Riel is sick.
Yeah.
I should put that out there.
Yeah,
Riel,
it's real spicy.
I'm really liking
Blood
Riel.
and Back to Basics. Wow.
yeah, you get to run Riel as a really cool sort of anti-meta deck. You get to run your moons and back to basics. You get to do some fun wheelie things and storm off and do like non-traditional
and
win
one
cons.
mana clear everybody else's board. Oh my god.
Oh yeah, there's lots of fun tricks. There's lots of fun tricks with that.
Sorry, clear everybody's board.
The one thing that's a bit concerning. Yeah, the one thing that concerns me about Riel is her ability to win the game. I've been looking at like Underworld Breach kind of win cons, and maybe breaching, going through your deck into Thassa's Oracle, which is it's whatever. But being kind of instantly locked out by Draenus Magistrate or Rule of Laws in casting multiple spells per turn is a bit of a concern. So I'll fiddle around with that and see how it goes.
Yeah, I know this is like an underrated mechanic in CDH, but you can actually attack people with creatures.
Oh, believe me, I know. Riel gets very large. I've got a Aven. I think it's called Aven Windcaller, because I think cycling is actually really important with Riel. So when you cycle it, I'm pretty sure it gives target creature flying. So dude, you just jump your Riel, swing in for lethal commander damage. Easy.
Yes. Yeah. And cleaning up is also pretty cool.
Okay, before we close out, I just want to say, like, I'm so happy. Like, I've spent, the last now about 24 hours thinking about all the things I can do. And, it's like, oh, well, the first thought is, well, how's the meta's going to shape up? And it's like, oh, well, everyone will do this. And then I went, wait, but if everyone's doing that, they'll just counter it this way. And, like, that realization of just, like, there are going to be a whole bunch of strategies. Strategies are actually going to counter other strategies. And then, like, people will do different things to try and gain advantages. And just, everything's just so good. And I'm so happy. And
dude,
I
what do you mean
can't
you've
put it
only
into
been spending
words,
the last 24 hours thinking about this? I've been spending the last, like, since Oracle printing, thinking about what it'd be like without Flash. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah, this is just amazing. I'm so happy that this happened. I was very, if it hadn't have happened, this ban list, I was pretty convinced it wasn't going to happen. But wow,
but it did. Hell yeah.
So that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a Patreon, we are at patreon.com/Into the North Podcast. Thank you, as always, to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our long-suffering podcast editor, Roadkill. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Bye.
Have a good one.